people think, oh, sleep is not a biohack. How can sleep be a biohack? Sleep is such a big contributor to personal health. Many people think that our genetic makeup is what's going to dictate whether we get a disease or not. If we're not looking after our gut health, then things can start to turn wrong. Women are innately caregivers. We always put other people first. If we're not looking after ourselves, then we can't look after our family.
If you've heard of the longevity Bible, Lifespan, by Professor David Sinclair, you know that living well is more important than just living long. In fact, this show is dedicated to the science of beauty, wellness, and longevity. That's why I'm so thrilled to partner with Melrose Future Lab. Future Lab is Australia's first supplement range focused on extending not just your lifespan, but your health span. Available exclusively at Chemist Warehouse, these affordable and science-backed supplements are the key to aging well. Today, we're exploring the evolving world of personalised biohacking for women. Longevity, performance, and radiance are the driving forces of the female biohacking movement. And joining me is Azra Alagic, a health consultant, behaviour change specialist, integrative nutrition health coach, and host of the Biohackher podcast. Azra is a passionate advocate in the role of personalised strategies in helping women live longer and better. In our conversation, we'll delve into how she's personally navigated the biohacking landscape, the evidence-based practices she champions, and the future she envisions for women's health optimisation. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. This conversation is based on personal insights and is designed to inspire, not prescribe. For anything related to individual health, please seek advice from your trusted medical professional. Azra, I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast. We met recently at the Ageless Radiance Club in Brisbane in real life, and we'd been in contact before, and then here we are on the podcast. It seems a really beautiful and natural evolution. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Bahar. It's so lovely to be here with you today. And yes, it's been great to connect with you. And can I just say that the event in Brisbane was absolutely amazing. Yeah, I had such a great time.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really good. And I think the reason that I really wanted to have this conversation with you, and I'm so pleased that you were able to see what I do, and I'm excited to see and learn more about what you do, is that the longevity conversation and the biohacking conversation in particular has really transformed in the women's space. And there's such a great opportunity to talk about it outside of bro terms. And also in the same way, it's exciting for women to think about their bodies as performance machines and not just wanting to be thin or not just wanting to be beautiful, but also wanting to have strength, wanting to have stamina, wanting to perform at peak levels. So I think both of our worlds are joining and colliding at just the right time.
Yeah, definitely. And all of those points that you've highlighted, we're definitely seeing women really starting to take that on board, really starting to see that they can take control of their own health and their own biology and really proactively manage that as they get older, which is fantastic to see. It's not something that we have to be submissive about.
Should we start off with some definitions, maybe so that if anyone is tuning in and hasn't necessarily heard the term biohacking before, let's put some definitions of how we're going to talk about biohacking on today's episode.
Yeah, sure. So biohacking is about taking control of your own biology and also your environment to be able to optimize your health to live well longer. And so I think for many, many years, we've relied on a very reactive approach to managing our health, where these days personalized medicine is very much the way of the future when it comes to managing our health. And it's about being proactive so that we can control how we age and to ensure that we're not necessarily going to end up with a chronic disease, because having a disease is not necessarily our destiny. It is very much about looking at how can we manage our health now to prevent the diseases later on as we get older. And so that comes into consideration when we look at nutrition, when we look at our environment, things like exercise and so on, but also looking at how we can leverage off technologies, which is really something that's a growth sector in the biohacking space.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make. And I'll just clarify, if I'm understanding correctly, that a lot of the levers that you're talking about are the epigenetic levers. And you're saying that we're not destined to live out our genetic blueprint because there is so much we can do with the environment, with the food, with the input and the epigenetic environment that can actually change what is our destiny. I want to reference one of the speakers from the event, Professor Derek Richard, who is studying aging and longevity, and he has a number of PhDs under him who are also studying it. And he gave some pretty startling realities about the perspective of, the big diseases that we're likely to experience, and how, in a sense, we have to accept that they're coming. But what happens to us with that is what you're saying can be moderated, prevented, delayed. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
definitely. Because when we look at it, we many people think that our genetic makeup is what's going to dictate whether we get a disease or not. In actual fact,
Mm,
more than 80% of the contributing factors is epigenetics. Our genes
mm.
only make up a small component as to whether we're going to get a disease or not. And so when we're aware of that, we're empowered to be able to make changes. We can switch our genes on and off as well now through epigenetics. And those are the choices that we make in terms of our lifestyle choices, our food, how we manage our stress, whether we're exercising sufficiently or not. These are the things that can really contribute to how well we age.
I want to say at the top of this episode that you have had an amazing lived experience of biohacking. And that's why I invited you onto the show, because I think it is nice to tell the story of lived experience. I did an episode, I think maybe 2.5 years ago, on all the things that I do. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, but I have had lived experience of what happens when you take certain aspects of your health dashboard into your own hands. And one of the first things that I learnt in the realms of biohacking and wellness is that you have to understand what's happening inside your body. And then you have to have measured and measurable levers that you test and learn from. And I would love for you to start off by telling us how you came upon the world of biohacking and your personal experience.
Look, absolutely. Like so many of us, it started off with my own health issues. I've been fortunate that I've had a pretty fast metabolism over the years, that I've been relatively healthy for most of my life, other than from suffering from migraines for many, many years. And really, that should have been a red flag for me earlier on. But I wasn't educated or empowered or informed to pick up on those signals at that time. And what happened for me was that I started to become unwell. I ended up ending with severe joint pain. I had massive bloating. I was really unhealthy in the gut. And I ended up going to a number of different doctors to try to get some answers as to what was going on. And my migraines actually increased in severity as well. I started having really chronic migraines every 3 days that were really making me very unwell, nauseous, and basically I was bedridden with them.
Can I ask you how old you were at
So
this time?
I was probably in my late 30s, early 40s at that time. And I think this is the trap that a lot of younger women fall into, that they think that they're, and I suppose like well, men as well, that they're invincible. And I certainly thought that as well for many, many years. I thought I could eat and do whatever I wanted to, and it wasn't going to impact my body. Well, I know better now because of the training that I've since done and because of my lived experience. I think that it's really important to understand our bodies. And I think we've lost the art of listening to our bodies. And I certainly had what I call, and so many other women call rushing women syndrome. I was studying full
Mm.
time, I was working full time, I was bringing up 3 young children, and I wasn't creating much time for myself. And so I wasn't listening to those signals that my body was trying to give me to learn and to go away and seek the help that I needed to be able to get on top of it sooner rather than later. In the end, I ended up with mercury toxicity, as I said. I was diagnosed with leaky gut syndrome. And as a result of that, I ended up having to go on a complete detox for 6 months, eliminating foods, eliminating alcohol, and so on. And I can say, with great joy today that I have rarely had a migraine these days. And if I do, it's not linked to my gut. It's normally linked to me overdoing it at the gym or pulling a muscle or something like that. And so that's how I got into biohacking, and I started to look at my health there. But then I also came across Dr. David Sinclair's book, Lifespan. And that was such a huge eye opener for me because I,
Same for me. That was like seminal.
yeah,
Like it was science heavy
yeah,
and I found it hard going. And in fact, I had to read and listen to it at the same time to fully absorb it. I don't know how you went with all of the science, but it was like a crash course in biology. And I was like, at first, I was like pushing through, but I found it so interesting that I just wanted to soak it up.
yeah. It was science heavy and it was quite funny because I had to read it almost with looking up on Google certain terms and so on to familiarize
Oh,
myself.
for sure.
Yeah, so it's
Absolutely.
just,
I was reading it and I had the phone going and I was listening to it as an audiobook. And I watched like, I don't know, 100 YouTube videos of him interviewed about it. But yeah, it's definitely, it was definitely that light bulb moment I needed to go, hang on a second. Actually, I'm in charge of my body. And these are some really simple levers that you can pull. Can I ask you something? You talked about, and I find this really fascinating, and perhaps it segues into what you do professionally. Is that you do often have to go to multiple health professionals and certainly doctors to get either diagnostics or point in the direction of specialists who can help you or even sit with a doctor or a health professional that has the time and the bandwidth and the experience to hear you out. And I think that expands that time and that black hole is one of the things that prevents a lot of people from exploring biohacking because it's really actually a very expensive pursuit if you stack it all up. Gut health tests $400-500, full panel blood works, unless, they're bulk billed in Australia, hundreds of dollars. The integrative doctor's visits, hundreds of dollars. And then you get into the specializations. So, you're in a couple of $1,000s before you've even begun. And that is if they find what they're looking for. So I do think that good healthcare is quite prohibitive because of all the hurdles of costs and the disjointed nature of the healthcare system.
yeah, it's an interesting situation, I think, because when we weigh up the costs of proactive healthcare, yes, it absolutely does add up. But if we look at the costs of aged care and those people who end up with a chronic disease, that ends up being so much more. And so it's about weighing up whether is it better to put the money up now in a proactive way and to get an understanding of what's happening with our biology and what's happening with our health and try to implement some proactive preventative measures as opposed to waiting, getting sick, and then having a reactive approach and then having to pay for the treatments of chronic diseases. And I think that's an important consideration when we're looking at trying to manage our health in a proactive way. And yes, it can be unattainable for many, many people, but you can go to your GP. There are doctors that are bulk billing, and you can get your blood works done, and you can get a basic understanding of what's going on with your body. And I come back to also listening to our body. And as women, we're very intuitive. If we can just pause and just listen, our bodies will tell us what's going on. And then we can get the support of our medical practitioners to be able to address what's going on with our health. For me, Western medicine,
I want to challenge that a little bit if I
yeah,
can, because I think to your point, the Russian woman syndrome, the pause is the hardest thing to get right. So for most people, if you are, and I've had Dr. Libby on the show and she talks extensively about Russian women's syndrome. It's that rush, it's that overriding of our intuition, it's that overwhelm as to where to start that, as you said, is possibly the cheapest and the best place to start is if you can just take pause and inventory of how you feel, where you feel it. It might actually shortcut some of the seeking that you're doing. And I wonder if, our inability to pause is the cornerstone of a lot of the problems that biohacking and other medical intervention or non-medical intervention tries to fix.
I think that there's a degree of that, certainly. But women are innately caregivers, and this is part of the problem, which contributes to the Russian women syndrome, I think. We always put other people first, and it's really about time that we need to start putting ourselves first and giving pause to be able to listen to ourselves and listen to our individual needs. Because if we don't do that, and if we're not looking after ourselves, then we can't look after our families. We can't look after our loved ones because we become unwell. We end up becoming too stressed. We end up getting sick. And so we're not there for our families in that way. So it's really important to take that pause and create that space to be able to look after ourselves. So, I take on board what you're saying, but I think that we need to start prioritizing ourselves and we need to empower
Oh,
women to
for
be able to
sure.
do that. For so many years,
Yeah.
there's this cultural sort of, I think, stigma there that, we're meant to do this as women. But that's not the case. I think that we need to give ourselves permission to be able to put ourselves first.
Can you tell me what steps you took? I mean, obviously, you were experimenting on yourself for a number of years before you got some relief, but then you went and got some qualifications and did some research that led to some studies. And can you tell me about what path you went on and what doors you knocked on that were not so fruitful and what doors you knocked on that gave you those deep learning moments?
Yeah. It was interesting for me because I'm a former journalist, so I'm a former broadcast journalist, and I came to it with that mindset, I suppose. I always like to look at the research. And so I started doing a lot more reading. And then what I realized was that because I was able to empower myself to be able to proactively manage my health, that I wanted to actually move into this space. I've been a behavioral change specialist for 20 years now, and I have worked with corporate clients on looking at how to shift behavior. And so, because of my passion for health and wellness, it was a natural progression, I suppose, for me to start to move into this space and something that I've always really been interested in. And I went away and studied to become an integrative nutrition health coach, and that's what I'm qualified as now, along with being a behaviour change specialist.
And what does that mean? What does I know that I understand integrative is a holistic point of view, but I would love for you to share with us what that actually means in the world of nutrition.
Yeah, sure. So, as an integrative nutrition health coach, it is looking at health from a holistic perspective. But I help guide my clients to look at the choices that they're making from an epigenetic perspective to see what is contributing to their health issues at that particular time. And so I work with other health professionals to be able to support clients. So I can't diagnose and I can't prescribe, so I work with other medical practitioners alongside those other allied health professionals to be able to help my clients. And so if a client comes to me, we do a detailed assessment in terms of what their current health issues are. And the reason we do that is because I need to understand, well, what are they being diagnosed with? What are their symptoms? What's contributing to, their current health issues in terms of epigenetics, nutrition, lifestyle choices, stress, and so on. And by doing a thorough assessment, I can then ascertain whether I can work with them or not, or whether I have to then refer them on to a doctor for further assessment and for them to receive clearance to be able to work with me as an integrative nutrition health coach. And so I'm really very particular about that. And, I think that there's a great degree of responsibility on me to ensure I'm helping clients in a way that is very supportive and is very ethical as well.
So in a way that you would be a great starting point for someone who's quite confused as to what the options are. And I think that what I'm hearing, and it makes good sense to me, is it would be like having a concierge service and a coach in one where, you take the time that perhaps the medical system won't take to do that full assessment and then handhold your clients through that process, but also making the relevant introductions as and when they're needed. And I think, when I look at integrative health in general, the benefit of going to an integrative doctor is that, exactly like you said, they have that suite of referrals available to them and they do take the time. And, it's probably the only doctor's appointment that you're going to get that's an hour and a half long. There's no other appointment that I know of that in in the traditional medical system that allows for that one-on-one consultation. And I think what you're talking about is so rare, especially for women, to have someone sit down with them and say, okay, tell me about you. Let's go through all the things that ail you, all the things that make you feel good, and then let's work out a plan together. How long does someone typically work with you for?
Typically, it's anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks, depending on what their current situation is and what their personal requirements are. And I develop plans for them that are very tailored and specific to that individual. We're also by individual, and what works for one person won't work for another person. And so it is very much about looking at that bio individuality. The starting point after that initial health assessment is to then ensure that they have had recent blood works done and their biometrics checked as well, because we need that baseline to be able to ascertain what's going on. I like to work with clients based on fact, not on guesswork. And I think that that's an important consideration as well. And that's kind of a little bit contrary to what biohackers do. And I'll just sort of put my hand up to say that as an individual biohacker, yes, there's a degree of experimentation that us biohackers do. But when it comes to working with clients as an integrative nutrition health coach, I very much insist on them doing those tests so that we understand what's going on, because we don't need to supplement for something that doesn't require supplementation, for as an example. We need to understand, food sensitivities as well, because that will then be factored into any sort of nutritional plan that I might develop for them. So there's lots of considerations there as part of that.
Do you believe in DNA testing?
I do. I've actually recently just had my DNA test done. I'm waiting for the results to come through. And the reason I believe in DNA testing is because it gives us, again, that baseline of understanding of what is our genetic predisposition in terms of what's happening with our health, so we can get an understanding of that. But I think it's also important for people to understand that it's not something that's necessarily set in concrete. We discussed earlier and touched on the fact that you can switch genes on and off through epigenetics. And when we have that information, we can empower ourselves to make better changes and considerations in terms of our lifestyle choices.
I am a massive fan of DNA testing, and we had the CEO of a DNA company, DNA Power, on the show a few years ago. And I'd had 23andMe, which is now quite controversial because I think they've gone into bankruptcy and there's some questions around what they're doing with the data. But I had that maybe 15 years ago. And then I had DNA Power because I'd done a lot of research on the integrity of the company, and it's owned, and they don't share, they don't sell, they don't do anything with the data. But what I really loved about that DNA test is, in addition to doing the testing, it comes with some coaching afterward, an interpretation of the results. And that for me was so valuable, to not only do the test and get the results, but to then have that interpreted. So the nutritional aspect of my predisposition to nutrition, as you were saying, supplementation, whether I needed it and what I genetically needed. That was just such a great thing to have had done. And then overlaid with that, I did blood works, which told a different part of the story. And then, I had other tests like a DEXA scan to understand my bones. And like you said, where do you pay the price? Do you pay it down the line when you're frantically trying to fix things, or do you pay it up front? And I started becoming really interested in all the things that you're talking about at around 45, 47. And I experimented on myself to the point where I absolutely can tell if a certain vitamin will, do what it says on the packet. And I know when I'm missing it, I can feel it and I know it. And in addition to that, I have biometric evidence and testing and retesting on whether it's helping me and what it's doing to my symptoms. So I love that you're also going through that process in your consulting. I would love to know, in your experience, both personal and the work that you're doing with your client, what is the most effective blood works testing that a midlife woman should have?
Look, I think they need to have a complete full blood panel. They also need to get their hormones checked as well. And I think particularly for women that are going through perimenopause or menopause, that they need to also be doing microbiome tests so they can assess what's going on with their gut health. Because as we know, and based on studies and clinical research, gut health is such a huge contributor to overall health, but also to chronic disease as well. And so if we're not looking after our gut health, then things can start to go wrong. And as I know and have learned from personal experience as well, and I ended up with an autoimmune condition as a result of the gut health issues that I had.
I have a great update to share from Melrose Future Lab. Hormonal health is a vital hallmark of aging and longevity. And whether you're navigating perimenopause or menopause, Melrose Future Lab's new ultra-complex supplements are here to support you. Backed by clinical research and using advanced technology for effective absorption, these formulations are designed to provide relief through every phase. Find them exclusively at Chemist Warehouse. Always read the label and follow the directions for use.
And so I think that's what they're the main tests that I would definitely look at women getting. So the microbiome, gut health test, the full blood panel, and also the hormone test as well. Because if as we're getting older, and even when we're younger, our hormones play such a big factor in our health, and we need to factor in when we're biohacking that women are cyclical beings, and this is another important consideration, because when I first started biohacking, I was following, predominantly men, because there weren't many women biohacking at the time. And what I learned along the way is that what men are doing in the biohacking space does not necessarily apply or is beneficial to women. And so that is because, we need to take into consideration that, we cyclical beings, that affects our biology, it affects our mood, it affects so many different factors that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at what type of biohacks we would implement.
I was going to ask you about sleep, because I've read lots of studies that sleep for women and sleep for men are two completely different things. And as you were saying, so many of the biohacking tests and studies are data on male biohackers and so few on female biohackers. And sleep is one of the things that's most affected by cycles, by hormones. And I'm wondering if through your own experimentation or research, you have found anything that is statistically important or interesting when it comes to women and sleep.
Well, I know from personal experience that sleep is such a big contributor to personal health. I was a notorious bad sleeper, and that was predominantly because my circadian rhythms were completely out of whack as a result of working as a journalist and doing shift work and so on. And I really have focused considerably on looking at improving my sleep probably over the past 2 years. And what I've found is that when you have poor sleep and you're not getting that really good regenerative sleep that's so critical for cellular cleaning and reducing brain fog and so on, it really does have an impact on how we function on a day-to-day basis. It impacts our hormones.
What does regenerative sleep actually mean? So when sleep is
Yeah.
sleep, but what does the regenerative sleep mean?
So regenerative sleep is about getting deep sleep or REM sleep. If we're not achieving deep sleep or REM sleep, we don't have what I call the garbage cleaner coming in to clean up all of the oxidative stress that we've been experiencing, throughout the day. And so if you're getting intermittent sleep or if you're getting broken sleep, then that generally you're not actually experiencing that regenerative sleep. And so that does a disservice to you from a health perspective, because you are not regenerating, you are not healing overnight, which is so important to happen. It then also impacts, your hormone levels. It can impact your mitochondria. So we know that our mitochondria are the powerhouse of our cells. And so it's really important for us to get, regenerative sleep so that our mitochondria function appropriately.
It's kind of like the battery needs to get battery powered up so that it can be the power pack of our bodies.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. They're these little sort of factory cells that, we've got in our body, and it's about charging them back up so that we can function on a day-to-day basis. But when we get poor sleep, we also end up with inflammation in the body as well. And we know that inflammation is such a significant contributor to chronic disease as well. And so, we end up seeing a whole heap of things happening to us when we get bad sleep. We get inflammation, we end up with metabolic issues because we start to put on weight, because of our hormone fluctuations that get impacted as a result of that poor sleep. We end up with brain fog as well because of the inflammation and the oxidative stress. Metabolism isn't able to recalibrate while we're sleeping overnight, and also impacts our skin and our joints and our muscles and our mood.
I have to agree with you. If one of the best things that I did for long-term weight loss was improve my sleep. And that was remarkable. And that was because I was going through menopause, didn't know I was going through menopause. I got on HRT and started taking estrogen. My sleep improved. I lost weight.
Yeah.
And so counterintuitive to people putting on weight during menopause, the minute I fixed my sleep and stopped getting up because of hot flashes and like night sweats, I think over 2 years, I lost about 6 kilos.
Yeah.
Which is a lot on my frame.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me at all. It is such a great contributor to managing our hormones and managing that belly fat, because that all comes down to stress.
It was exactly that. It was exactly that. Can we biohack sleep?
Yes, 100%. Absolutely, we can biohack sleep. These are probably one of my most favorite biohacks and people think, sleep is not a biohack. How can sleep be a biohack? Well, it is, because
it's the best
one. It is the best one because, it's my non-negotiable biohack. It really is. I've become very selfish about my sleep, so much to the point that, every now and then I go to my what I call my she shed. And that's, I sleep separately to my husband because he's a snorer, right? And so we need to ensure uninterrupted sleep. We're working on his snoring, and that's improving, and that's a result of some of the food allergies that he has. But with sleep, the best way to biohack it is, number one, ensure that you're sleeping in a room that is set to temperature between 18 to 21 degrees. A cooler room means that you are able to better moderate your own body heat as you're sleeping, and you're not going to be waking up at that 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning because you're actually overheating. Number two, ensure that you are avoiding blue light prior to going to bed at night time. Are you a phone scroller?
Fail.
It's a really big contributor to poor sleep, and the reason being is because it interrupts our melatonin levels. And so we need to be able to manage our melatonin levels so that we can have that really great regenerative sleep. And I go to probably the next level, where I ensure that there is no blue light in any of the rooms that I will sleep in. We were discussing earlier offline about the fact that I was away in Noosa for the long weekend. So I had little stickers that I put on everything, like on the TV and on any little blue light in the hotel room, so that light is not interrupting my circadian rhythms and waking me up unnecessarily during the night. You can sleep with an eye mask as well, so that's another great one to use. Try not to eat anything 2 hours, maybe even 3 hours, preferably prior to going to sleep at night, because your body is in work mode. If you're sleeping just before you go to bed, it's then digesting. And so, your body's you're not indicating to your body that it's time to wind down and time to go to sleep. And that's another thing people should really do as well, is to get into a routine. So I'm really strict with my sleep routine. I go to bed most nights at 9:30 at night, and I wake up every morning at around 5:30. And that's because my body, our bodies are like clocks. They love that structure. They love that regularity. And being able to signal to the body that this is the time to wind down and go to sleep, and this is the time to wake up, then the body performs a lot better that way. And so having that wind down routine as well, and having, moments of relaxation prior to going to sleep at night is also a great contributor to getting better sleep. So I signal my body by turning all the lights off in the house and making sure that we don't have the lights on, so that the lights aren't impacting. I wear blue blocker glasses if I'm watching any TV earlier in the evening. I'll have a hot shower or a warm bath, with some salts in there, some lavender oil and so on. And these are all things that you can start to create a beautiful habitual routine that can really nurture the body and signal to the body to start to slow down and start to get ready for rest and regeneration.
What are your thoughts, two things, on napping? Do you believe that napping is a good rest for your body midday, or do you think that it disrupts your sleep hygiene?
I'm probably not the best person to ask that one because I really struggle to sleep during the daytime. I always have. Look, I think that it comes down again to what works for you as an individual. For me, if I sleep during the day, it impacts my sleep at nighttime. I find that I don't get as good a night's sleep or a regenerative sleep in the evenings. But it depends, I think on what's happening with you at any moment in time. So, for example, I have had moments over the years where I've been working so hard and long hours and so on that there'll be a day that'll come along on the weekend where I'll think, you know what, I just need to go and lie down and I need to rest. And I will have a cat nap and I will feel better for it. And so again, it comes back to listening to my body and giving it what
Mm.
it needs at that particular time.
And what about what Andrew Huberman talks to about getting that light in your eyes before 10 a.m. and making that part of your sleep cycle,
Mhm.
wake cycle, and body clock cycle? Do you do that, getting light, unfiltered light into your eyes
Yeah, I
first thing in
definitely
the
do.
morning
I get up
before?
at 5:30 every morning, and that is because I want to be able to expose myself to that beautiful morning sunlight. So that's that natural blue light that really helps to set our circadian rhythms. And I found that that is absolutely a biohack that has really helped me improve my sleep and get the circadian rhythms working the way they need to work and get into that sort of regularity as well. And also even the afternoon sunlight as well. A lot of people don't realize that getting the afternoon sunlight and that infrared light that comes through is really important to help set our circadian rhythm. So, it's a great time to be out in the mornings. I call it like a bit of a double or triple hack because you can go outside, you can get exposure to that beautiful blue light, you can do some groundwork and really sort of walk around barefoot on the grass and recharge and regenerate. And also do some breath work at the same time as well, which is a beautiful way to start the morning.
Well, you took me to exactly what I was going to ask you about next. In terms of biohacking sleep, what role does meditation, mindfulness, breath work have in the biohacking universe, particularly when it comes to reducing cortisol and boosting sleep or faking sleep, rather?
Mm. It's a really great question because it is something that definitely impacts our sleep. And I attended a biohacking conference last year at which Dr. Joe Dispenza was there. And, as we all know, he's a huge advocate of meditation. And I was really impressed to see the data and the scientific studies that he has behind, how meditation can help improve chronic stress, reduce cortisol levels, and improve our sleep as well. For me personally, I have found that it is, as I said, a significant contributor to improving my sleep. I naturally have high cortisol levels, and it's something that I have to constantly work on. And I think that that's just the nature of who I am. And the reason I have to constantly work on it is because, having low grade chronic stress constantly, is a contributor to inflammation in the body. And I know from the testing that I've done that I have high inflammation levels as well. And there's a reason for that in terms of a number of contributing factors, that being low grade chronic stress, childhood trauma, and also the gut health issues that I have as well, and the autoimmune condition. So these are all contributing factors to inflammation. So looking at how sleep can help bring cortisol levels down and the lead up to getting that regenerative sleep by doing things like meditating, mindfulness, and so on. It's about really signaling again to the body to start to slow down, to start to calm down, and to really shut down what I call my monkey mind, because I have this voice in my head that is constantly telling me I need to be doing this, I need to be doing that. And so it's about shutting that monkey mind down so that we can ease into that beautiful sleep.
Yes, and I guess the terminology of the monkey mind is about that, the evolutionary aspect of human development is that's that's something that humans are able to do through biohacking, through mindfulness practices, through, an intentional plan to slow down the chatter that an animal wouldn't be able to do. And that's part of our evolution, is that we are able to now use tools to do it. One of the things about biohacking that I find really fascinating, and I think I've seen accelerate, and I know that you love to explore is the wonderland of technology, and you talked about it before. And whether it be from wearable technology that's measuring and giving biofeedback, or whether it's technology that's, literally fast tracking or hacking certain outcomes that we want. Do you have a top 3, top 5 tech biohacks that you think are really worth investigating or spending your money on?
Yeah, look, I do love a bit of technology when it comes to biohacking. I have been wearing a wearable on my arm, and I've got it on today, and that's my Whoop. And we were talking about sleep before. This has been such a big contributor to me understanding how I sleep. And it is through monitoring my sleep through this particular wearable device that I've been able to understand how badly I used to sleep, and then to implement
Yeah.
those biohacks to be able to improve my sleep. Because the thing is, when you are not aware or you're not tracking what's happening with your body, it becomes your normal, right? You're not really conscious of the fact that it's not normal and that there are opportunities for improving. The other thing that I'm tracking at the moment is my HRV. As a postmenopausal woman, I have a low HRV, and at first I thought that that was going to be that was a real issue.
Can you tell us what that is for
Yeah,
someone who doesn't
yeah,
understand?
absolutely. So that's heart rate variability, right? And so when we look at heart rate variability, it's usually an indicator of our fitness. Now, I consider myself to be a pretty fit 57-year-old woman, but my heart rate variability is low. So it sits between, 45 and 35, which, can be, as I said, quite low. But again, it comes down to bioindividuality and what's happening with our hormones and what's happening with us personally at that particular time. And so by looking at it through a wearable like this, I've now been able to realize that that's actually normal for me and is actually good for me. And so it varies on your age as well. So younger people tend to have a higher heart rate variability as well. And so that's, again, a contributing factor in terms of what is happening with our hormones as well. The other type of technologies that I really love to use, as part of my biohacking stacks, look, there's the classic infrared sauna, which there's so many scientific studies around that in terms of how that contributes to our longevity and reduces our mortality rate. There's an infamous Finnish study where that they show that it reduced our mortality rate by over 40%. And so I do,
How often are you doing the infrared sauna?
yeah, I do one every other day. And that's
For how
yeah,
long?
20 minutes minimum, and it's about anywhere between 60 to 65 degrees is what I have it set at. And the reason I do it every other day is because it's a great way to detox as well. So because I've had mercury toxicity before, I've also recently found out that I've been exposed to mold as well. So I use the sauna to be able to detox as well. Another great tech piece of technology that I've recently tried out, and it's similar to a sauna, but it actually is kind of like the next level up, is called the HOCAT. It's kind of like this
Oh,
space
yeah.
capsule that you sit in, and it does PEM, and it's, got the steam going, and it's got, the infrared, everything. It's got all these different modalities in it that really help you to detox. So it sounds like you've tried it, yeah?
I did, and I saw you going into your little chamber, and I went, "Yes, she's in."
Yeah, it's great, and so it is a really great all-rounder to be able to tackle, your biohacking and a number of different health issues as well in terms of the different modalities that that particular piece of technology can do. We mentioned earlier about getting out into the sun, exposing ourselves to blue light. I've had a number of clients that have said, "Oh, isn't that kind of counteractive to, the safe sun message and being exposed to oxidative stress?" And going outside early and in the morning and late in the afternoon, well, you're not really getting exposed to those harmful UV rays. But there's a really great app called D-Minder that I tell my clients about. And that helps to ensure that you're getting the right amount of vitamin D on a daily basis. And it'll tell you when's the best time to go outside, how long you need to be outside for. It even tells you when to flip as well, sort of front and back, so that you're getting the maximum amount of vitamin D exposure in a safe way. So that's another great one as well. And I must admit, at the Biohacking conference, there are a whole heap of different technologies over there that's really growing in this space at the moment. And, there are things like, different oxygen technologies that are coming out that are really great to help optimize detoxification and to really help healing as well. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is another one that I really love as well.
I find that immediately I can feel the
Yeah.
difference with that. I
Yeah.
mean, nearly always, if I travel overseas on the day that I land back, I'll go and have a hyperbaric chamber because the fast tracking of feeling better is
Yeah.
remarkable. Just have that clean, especially after being in a tin can for, however many hours and not getting that good oxygen.
Yeah.
I can feel that. And I can only imagine that if you had regular hyperbaric oxygen usage, how much sharper, how much better you'd feel.
Yeah, it definitely has an impact. It really helps to get that beautiful pure oxygen through the blood. It helps with tackling chronic inflammation, which was one of the reasons that I started doing it as well to address the inflammation levels in my body. It helps to sharpen memory as well. It just helps with overall well-being. And so, there are a whole heap of different technologies out there, and I think it's just about finding what's right for you and what's accessible for you as well, because I think here in Australia in particular as well, some of this new technology is only just starting to come in from the States and from Europe and just starting to be accessible to everyone.
Accessibility is kind of a running thread of this conversation, and I'm so pleased and grateful that you're actually talking about some things that we can do for free as well that are excellent biohacks, sleep being one of them, getting early sunlight or late afternoon sunlight, getting rid of UV light and blue light exposure. I would love for you to talk about intermittent fasting because there's always some version of this that people want to ask me about. And I have done intermittent fasting. I did it for about 5 years. I had amazing, amazing success with it for the first 4 years. And then it felt like it plateaued and I had to switch it out and reduce the number of fasting hours. What have you learned about intermittent fasting that's worth
Yeah.
investigating?
Again, I think it comes down to where we're at in our life. Similar to you, I used to do a lot of intermittent fasting when I was younger. I'm 57 now. I did more intermittent fasting in my 40s and in
Yeah,
my
me too.
30s because it worked for my biology at that time, and it was very
Mhm.
successful in terms of not only managing weight but also really helping with cognition and sharpening my memory and my focus. I find it really great for that. Now,
Yeah, it was amazing for that.
yeah, really amazing for that. And that's because
Mm.
the ketones kicking in, right? So I think for me nowadays, though, I do it every now and then. And that's because at my age, it works differently. When you're going through perimenopause and menopause, the body's already going through a fair amount of upheaval in terms of the hormonal change. We're more inclined to have inflammation at those later years in life. We're more inclined to have sort of more chronic stress as well. And so it's about reducing the stress load on the body. And so when we do intermittent fasting, that can increase the stress load on our body. And so I tend to be a little bit gentler with myself these days. And there's some real good scientific research out there to back this as well. I know that like Dr. Tracy Sims talks a lot about this as well. It's really about looking at where you're at in your life and making sure that you're doing intermittent fasting at the right time. And for those women, that's still in their 30s or in their 20s or in their 40s, it's about looking at their cycle as well and making sure that they're intermittent fasting at the right time. So, for instance, when you're menstruating, you don't necessarily want to be intermittent fasting during that time because, again, your body is already under a degree of stress at that particular time. And that's when you really should be going into that sort of cozy, loving mode, really looking after yourself and really nurturing yourself. And so it's the same for postmenopausal women as well about reducing that stress.
Azra, can you share with us any great resources or go-to destinations to learn more about intermittent fasting so that we're not just guessing and hoping for a good outcome? Because it seems like such a great free biohacking tool to explore, but it would be great to do it with some guardrails.
Yeah, definitely. Fast Like a Girl is a really great book to help women look at how intermittent fasting can help them and when they should be fasting. So that's definitely, a resource that people can go to. I think that, there are different the problem with intermittent fasting is that there are different schools of thought. So we've got different practitioners out there, some who advocate intermittent fasting and others who don't advocate intermittent fasting.
That's with everything, right?
It is,
It's just
it
you could
is, yeah.
there are PhDs on either side of it. There are pundits on either side of, especially with, new sciences. It's really hard to know where to
Yeah,
start.
which is where it comes back to the self-experimentation, and yes, we want to be able to have some guardrails there, and we want to be able to be guided by the science. We absolutely need to do that. And there's lots of scientific papers out there that show that intermittent fasting can be beneficial from a longevity perspective. But again, it depends on what stage you are in your life. And I really want to stress that because I think that's an important factor. And come back to listening to our bodies again. And I know I've been going on about this ad nauseum during our chat today, but I just think it's such an important point that, because we are so by individual, that we need to listen to our bodies and make sure we're doing what's feeling right for us.
I think one of the things that I've learned in the past year or so is that a lot of the conversation around menopause and midlife health used to be very, very focused on hormonal health as the cornerstone of the conversation, which I don't want to take away from. I think it was remarkable in my own experience. But I think what's interesting is that a lot of those leaders in the menopause health space, and certainly many of whom I've had on the show and I follow, they are now pivoting into longevity and biohacking and for menopause healthcare and menopause medication and supplementation to be a conversation around not just hormonal balancing to get you past a certain life stage, but to be a long-term partner in your longevity and your long-term health span play. And when you talk about biohacking, I think it's really interesting that you keep bringing it back to a topic that for women. And I think that distinction is so important and so interesting. And it's great to hear you kind of also speak about it, that there are resources, there are tools, and there are ways of doing biohacking that are optimized for women. One of the biohacking tools that everyone talks about is cold plunging or cold exposure. And what I have recently learned is that what works for men is really different to what works for women, and we don't need it as cold for as long. And so, if you're sitting in a bucket of ice for 10 minutes, it's going to signal enormous stress to a woman's body, and you can get the same benefit. And I guess the same goes for infrared saunas. What's good for women is possibly different to what's good for men.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, cold plunging, has been such a hot trend in the biohacking space, over recent years. And again, it is very different for men and women. I cold plunge and I used to cold plunge a lot, but again, the science has moved. And I think this is what I love about biohacking, that it is backed by science. And so this is why it's important to stay abreast about what the latest research is showing. So we know that cold plunging is great for men. Men have been doing it, particularly sporting teams and so on, post, a game of footy or whatever. And, it's great for their recovery and so on. So for women, again, depending on what phase we are in our lives, it's not necessarily beneficial for us, or we need to moderate it. So instead of doing a cold plunge, which is set at 5 degrees, we do a cold plunge that's set more at 13 degrees, or 15 degrees. So it's not as cold and it doesn't have such an impact, on our cortisol levels, and we don't have such a strong stress reaction to it. And this goes back to, again, our earlier conversation around managing stress and looking at what we can do to be able to nurture ourselves and be a little bit kinder and gentler with ourselves in terms of how we biohack and how we manage our health, so that we're doing it, in a way that's right for us women. Because for so many years, decades and decades now, the clinical research around health and clinical studies has been done by men for men, and it's only just recently now that we're starting to see, really good studies coming through that are being done by women for women. And that's what we need to start listening to, because our biologies are so very different. and we need to be doing what's right for us.
Well, it was an absolute joy to have you on the show. And I'm actually going to put a link to your website because you have a lot of great blog posts. You have a lot of great interviews that we can learn from to continue this conversation by women for women. And I think we've just, scratched the tip of what is available. But in summary of this conversation, I would really urge you that if you are investigating biohacking, you might want to look at studies and research that specifically for your age group, for your goals, and also for your gender, possibly. Thank you so much, Azra, for being on the show. It's been a joy to connect with you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Bahar. It's been lovely chatting with you today.